Here's something most people notice but never say out loud. That feels different than savings. Not just different in the obvious way, one is negative, one is positive, different in how it sits in your mind, how it affects your decisions, how it shapes what feels possible. If you have $1,000 in credit card debt, it feels heavy, pressing, like something that needs to be dealt with soon. If you have $1,000 in a savings account, it feels nice, comfortable, but not urgent, not demanding. Mathematically, these two situations are mirror images. You're $1,000 away from zero in both cases. The numbers are identical, just with different signs in front of them. But they don't feel identical. And this asymmetry, this fundamental difference in how your brain processes negative balances versus positive ones, shapes financial outcomes in ways that go far deeper than most people realize. This isn't about whether you should pay off debt or build savings first. That question assumes you're making a rational choice between two equivalent options. But your brain isn't treating them as equivalent. And until you understand why, the advice people give you won't quite make sense.
Let's look at what this actually feels like in daily life. You have credit card debt, let's say $5,000. It's been there for a while. You're making the minimum payments plus a little extra when you can. Every month, you get the statement. And every month, even if the balance went down slightly, there's this low-level awareness that the debt is still there. It's not panic, it's not constant anxiety, but it's presence, a weight you're carrying. Now imagine you have $5,000 in a savings account instead. It feels good, secure, like you've accomplished something, like you have a cushion. But here's the thing, it doesn't demand your attention the same way. You don't check your savings account with the same frequency you check your debt balance. You don't feel the same pressure to make it grow. You don't lose sleep over whether you're adding to it fast enough. The debt feels like a problem that needs solving. The savings feels like a nice thing to have. And this difference shows up in how people make decisions. Someone with $5,000 in debt and a $1,000 windfall, a tax refund, a bonus, a gift, will often feel strong pressure to put that money toward the debt. It feels responsible, smart, like the obvious thing to do. Someone with $5,000 in savings and a $1,000 windfall will often spend at least part of it because the savings doesn't feel incomplete. It doesn't feel like there's a hole that needs filling. It's already fine, already enough. Adding to it feels optional. Same $1,000, same net worth impact if you look at it purely mathematically, but completely different psychological weight. And here's where this gets uncomfortable. This asymmetry means that for most people, eliminating debt feels more urgent than building wealth, which makes sense emotionally. Debt feels bad, savings feels good. Of course, you'd prioritize removing the bad thing over increasing the good thing. But financially, this creates a trap. Because if you focus exclusively on eliminating debt before building any savings, you leave yourself vulnerable. No cushion, no flexibility, no room for the unexpected. And when something unexpected happens, and it always does, you end up back in debt. The cycle continues. Not because you're irresponsible, not because you don't understand the math, but because your brain is operating on a different logic than the spreadsheet. The reason this feels confusing is because the standard advice treats debt and savings as if they're just numbers. Pay off high-interest debt first. That's mathematically optimal. Build an emergency fund. That's financially prudent. Both pieces of advice are correct, but they're incomplete because they don't account for how your brain actually processes these things. To your brain, debt isn't just a negative number. It's a commitment you made in the past that's now constraining your future. When you borrowed that money, you made a deal, and now you're living inside that deal. Every month, part of your income is already spoken for, already committed, not available for decisions you want to make now. Debt is past decisions limiting present freedom. That's why it feels heavy. Savings, on the other hand, is potential, options, freedom you're creating for your future self. But potential doesn't feel urgent. Options feel nice to have, but not critical. until you need them, and then suddenly not having them feels like a crisis. This is the confusion. Logically, you understand that having savings protects you, gives you choices, reduces stress. But emotionally, building savings doesn't trigger the same sense of urgency that reducing debt does. So you end up in this strange position where you know what you should do, but it doesn't feel as important as what you feel you must do. And the must do is almost always paying down debt, even when building a small emergency fund first would actually protect you better in the long run. Even when the interest rate on your debt is low enough that investing might make more mathematical sense. Even when you're sacrificing flexibility and resilience to chase the feeling of being debt-free. The numbers say one thing, your brain says another, and your brain usually wins.
So let's name the system operating here. What we're describing is called mental accounting, combined with loss aversion and temporal discounting. But forget the terms. What matters is how it works. Here's the structure. Your brain doesn't treat all money as interchangeable. It creates mental categories, mental accounts. Money in your checking account feels different than money in your savings account, even though it's all your money, even though you could transfer between them instantly. Money you earn from your salary feels different than money you win in a lottery, even though a dollar is a dollar. And critically, money you owe feels different than money you own. Debt lives in a mental account labeled obligations. It's money you have to pay back. It's not negotiable. It's not optional. Savings lives in a mental account labeled reserves or future resources. It's yours, but it's set aside, protected, not for current use. These mental boundaries are invisible. You didn't consciously create them, but they're incredibly powerful. They determine what feels right to do with money in different situations. Here's an example. Imagine you have a $2,000 emergency fund and a $5,000 credit card balance. Your car needs an unexpected $1,000 repair. Mathematically, you have three options. 1. Pay for the repair with your emergency fund. Your savings drops to $1,000, your debt stays at $5,000. 2. Put the repair on your credit card. Your savings stays at $2,000, your debt increases to $6,000. 3. Use $500 from savings and put $500 on the card. Split the difference. Logically, option 1 makes the most sense. You have the money, that's literally what the emergency fund is for, and you avoid adding to your debt. But here's what many people actually do. They put it on the credit card, because touching the emergency fund feels wrong. It feels like going backward, like undoing progress. The emergency fund is in the savings account, sacred, protected, reserved for some future crisis that feels more serious than this one. The credit card is in the debt account. It's already negative. Adding a bit more to an existing negative doesn't feel as bad as reducing a positive. This is mental accounting at work. The boundaries between accounts are creating decisions that don't make mathematical sense, but make perfect psychological sense. Now let's add the second part, loss aversion. This is your brain's tendency to feel losses more intensely than equivalent gains. Losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good. This is why debt feels heavier than savings feels light. Owing $5,000 triggers loss aversion. It's a negative state. Your brain is motivated to eliminate it because negative states feel bad. Having $5,000 in savings triggers satisfaction, but not as intensely. It's a positive state. Nice. Comfortable. But your brain isn't driven to increase it with the same intensity that it's driven to eliminate debt. The pain of owing is sharper than the pleasure of having. So you prioritize reducing the pain over increasing the pleasure, even when both actions have the same net worth impact. And finally, temporal discounting. This is your brain's tendency to value immediate outcomes more than future ones. Debt is immediate. It's happening now. Every month, you're making payments. Every month, you're reminded of it. Savings is future-oriented. You're building something for later, for emergencies that might happen, for opportunities that might arise. Might happen always feels less urgent than is happening. So debt gets priority. Not because you're short-term focused or financially illiterate, but because your brain is wired to respond more strongly to present constraints than future possibilities. This is the system. Mental boundaries that make different piles of money feel different even when mathematically they're equivalent. Loss aversion that makes negative balances feel heavier than positive balances feel light. Temporal discounting that makes present obligations feel more urgent than future protections. And the result is that most people prioritize debt elimination over wealth building, even when the math doesn't clearly support that priority. The system runs automatically, below conscious awareness, shaping decisions that feel obvious but are actually products of invisible psychological structures. Now let's examine why common financial advice struggles with this system. The most common advice is pay off your high-interest debt first. The logic is straightforward. If you're paying 18% interest on credit card debt and earning 1% in a savings account, you're losing 17% on that money. Mathematically, that's correct, but it ignores the protection that savings provides. Having even a small emergency fund, say $1,000, means that when something breaks or goes wrong, you don't have to add to your debt. Without that buffer, every unexpected expense becomes new debt, which means you're not actually making progress. You're just cycling, paying down debt, then adding to it again when emergencies hit. So the advice to pay off debt first often keeps people trapped longer than a balanced approach would. But here's the deeper issue with this advice. It treats the decision as purely mathematical, as if you're a rational calculator optimizing for the lowest total interest paid. But you're not. You're a human being with psychological needs. And one of those needs is feeling secure, feeling like you have options, feeling like you're not one car repair away from crisis. Savings provides that feeling. Debt elimination doesn't. So when someone follows the advice to pour everything into debt payoff with zero emergency fund, they often feel more financially stressed, not less, even as the debt number goes down. Because the stress isn't just about the debt. It's about vulnerability, about having no cushion, about feeling trapped. Another piece of common advice: build a 1-month emergency fund, then focus on debt. This is better. At least it acknowledges the need for some buffer. But here's what happens in practice. People build the 1-month fund, then they shift everything to debt payoff. And then 3 months later, they have an expense that's just slightly more than the emergency fund covers. So they drain the fund completely and put the rest on the card. Now they have no emergency fund and more debt than before. And they feel like they failed, like they couldn't stick to the plan. But they didn't fail. The plan failed them. Because 1 month isn't really enough. Not for most people. Not in a country where medical bills, car repairs, and job instability are common. The advice underestimated how much buffer people actually need to feel secure and stay out of the debt cycle. One more piece of advice. Use the debt snowball method. Pay off your smallest debts first for psychological wins. This acknowledges psychology, which is good. The idea is that paying off a small debt completely feels more rewarding than making tiny progress on a large debt. So you get motivation boosts along the way. And for some people, this works. But here's what it misses. The psychological win of eliminating a small debt is temporary. The feeling fades, just like any other positive change. Your brain adapts. And if you're still living with zero emergency cushion, still vulnerable to unexpected expenses, the underlying anxiety doesn't go away. You've eliminated one debt, but you haven't changed the fundamental dynamic that created debt in the first place. So the wins feel good briefly, but they don't create lasting security. Because security doesn't come from having zero debts. It comes from having options, resources, flexibility, things that savings provides, but debt elimination doesn't. Let's go deeper into why this asymmetry between debt and savings is so powerful. There's a time dimension to money that most people don't think about explicitly. When you borrow money, you're bringing future resources into the present. You want something now. You don't have the money now, so you borrow from your future self. This feels convenient in the moment, but it creates a commitment. Your future self, the person you'll be 6 months from now, a year from now, is now obligated to pay back what your current self borrowed. Your future income is already spoken for, already allocated, before you even earn it. This is why debt feels constraining. It's not just about the money, it's about time, about freedom, about whether your future self gets to make decisions based on what they want or based on commitments that past you made. Savings works in the opposite direction. When you save money, you're moving present resources into the future. You have money now, you don't spend it, you set it aside for your future self. This creates freedom. Your future self will have options that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They'll be able to handle unexpected situations, make choices that align with what they want, not be forced into decisions by immediate necessity. But here's the asymmetry. The constraint of debt is felt immediately, every month, every payment. The freedom of savings is only felt when you need it, when something happens, when an opportunity arises. Present constraint feels heavier than future possibility, so people prioritize eliminating the thing they feel now over building the thing they'll feel later, even when building the thing they'll feel later would actually reduce the thing they feel now. Because having savings reduces the stress of debt. Knowing you have a cushion makes the debt feel less suffocating. But most people don't realize this until after they've built the cushion. Before that, it just feels like the debt is the problem and eliminating it is the solution. Here's another layer. Debt and savings have different relationships with control. When you're in debt, you're in a reactive position. Someone else, the credit card company, the bank, the lender, has a claim on your money. They set the terms. They set the interest rate. They set the minimum payment. You're responding to their structure, playing by their rules. Savings puts you in a proactive position. You're building your own structure, your own buffer, your own set of options. No one else has a claim on that money. It's yours, under your control. And control matters psychologically. Feeling like you're in control of your financial situation reduces stress more than the actual dollar amounts would suggest. This is why someone with $5,000 in savings and $5,000 in debt might feel better than someone with zero savings and zero debt, even though their net worth is worse, because they have the feeling of control, of options, of security. The zero debt person has fewer obligations, but they also have less cushion, less flexibility, less ability to handle whatever comes next. And in an unpredictable world, cushion matters, more than the math would suggest. So here's the reframe. Debt and savings aren't opposites. They're different dimensions of the same thing: time and control. Debt is borrowed time, commitments made in the past that constrain the present and future. Savings is purchase time, resources set aside now that create freedom in the future. And both matter. Most people think about this as a binary choice, either pay off debt or build savings. But it's not binary. It's not one or the other. It's a balance between reducing past commitments and creating future options. And the right balance depends on more than just interest rates. It depends on how much uncertainty you're facing, how stable your income is, how expensive emergencies tend to be in your life, how much psychological security you need to function without constant stress. For some people, aggressive debt payoff makes sense. Their income is stable, their expenses are predictable, they have other safety nets, family, job security, low cost of living. For other people, building savings first makes more sense. Their income fluctuates. Unexpected expenses are common. They don't have other safety nets. They need the cushion to avoid cycling back into debt. Neither approach is universally correct. But understanding the system, understanding why debt feels different than savings, how mental accounting works, why loss aversion makes negatives feel heavier than positives, lets you make the choice consciously, not based on what the math says in isolation, but based on what actually works for your psychology, your circumstances, your need for security versus optimization. Because here's the truth most financial advice doesn't say clearly enough. The mathematically optimal choice doesn't matter if you can't sustain it psychologically. If paying off debt first leaves you so stressed and vulnerable that you end up back in debt within months, it wasn't actually the optimal choice.
If building savings first costs you some interest but keeps you out of the debt cycle and reduces your stress enough that you make better decisions overall, it was the better choice, even if the spreadsheet says otherwise. The goal isn't to minimize interest paid. The goal is to build a financial position that's both mathematically sound and psychologically sustainable. And sometimes those two things point in slightly different directions. Being aware of that tension, understanding why your brain treats debt and savings asymmetrically, gives you the ability to design an approach that works for both the numbers and the human being behind them. So what changes when you start thinking this way? First, you stop feeling guilty about keeping some savings while you still have debt. The standard advice makes it sound like having any savings while carrying debt is irrational, wasteful, like you're paying interest unnecessarily. But you're not being irrational. You're protecting yourself. You're acknowledging that financial security isn't just about net worth. It's about resilience, flexibility, the ability to handle whatever happens without spiraling. $1,000 in savings while you have credit card debt might cost you $100 a year in extra interest. But if that $1,000 prevents you from adding $2,000 in new debt when your car breaks down, you're actually coming out ahead. The math isn't as simple as interest rate arbitrage. It includes the probability of needing emergency funds, the psychological cost of constant vulnerability, and the very real risk of cycling back into more debt without a buffer. Second, you start evaluating debt payoff strategies based on your actual psychology, not just theoretical optimization. Maybe the debt avalanche method, paying off highest interest rate first, makes the most mathematical sense. But if it means you won't see a debt fully eliminated for 2 years, and that lack of visible progress makes you feel like you're failing, it's not the right method for you. The debt snowball, paying off smallest debts first, might cost you a bit more in total interest. But if those small wins keep you motivated and engaged with the process, they're worth it. Or maybe you need a hybrid approach. Build a small emergency fund, then tackle debt. But keep contributing a little to savings even while paying down debt, because the feeling of building something matters to your psychology. There's no universal right answer. Just the answer that works for your brain, your circumstances, your tolerance for different kinds of stress. Third, you start seeing debt not as a moral failing, but as a structural reality that needs to be managed. Most Americans have debt at some point. Student loans, car loans, credit cards, medical bills, mortgages. It's not a sign of weakness or irresponsibility. It's a feature of how the financial system works in this country. What matters is whether you're managing it consciously or letting it manage you. Are you aware of the trade-offs you're making, the time you're borrowing, the future freedom you're giving up? Or are you just responding to immediate needs without thinking about the structure you're creating? Once you see debt as borrowed time and savings as purchased freedom, you can make those trade-offs deliberately. You can decide when borrowing from the future makes sense and when it doesn't, when building a buffer is worth the opportunity cost and when it's not. Not based on rigid rules, but based on clear thinking about what you're actually trying to build. Debt and savings are supposed to be opposites. On a spreadsheet, they are. One is negative, one is positive, mirror images. But in your mind, in your daily experience, and how they shape what feels possible, they're not symmetrical at all. Debt feels heavy, urgent, constraining. Savings feels light, optional, future-oriented. And that asymmetry shapes financial outcomes more than most people realize. It's why intelligent people stay trapped in debt cycles, why building wealth feels impossible even when income is decent, why following the mathematically optimal advice often doesn't work in practice. Not because people are irrational, but because the system their brain is running on treats these two things differently. And once you see that system, once you understand why your brain responds to debt and savings asymmetrically, you can work with it instead of against it. You can build a financial approach that honors both the math and the psychology. One that's optimized not just for the lowest interest paid, but for the highest likelihood of actually working over time. Because in the end, the best financial strategy isn't the one that looks perfect on paper. It's the one you can sustain. The one that builds security, not just in the numbers, but in how you feel about your financial position.
That's where real progress happens. Not when the debt reaches zero, but when you've built enough cushion, enough options, enough freedom that you're making financial decisions from a place of choice instead of necessity. The asymmetry doesn't go away. Your brain will always treat debt and savings differently, but understanding why gives you the ability to design around it, to build something that works, not just mathematically, but actually.